Welcome to another episode of The Road Less Explored. Today, we take a look back at a trip that happened in December 2006. A bunch of friends packed their stuff and went off to Mozambique. The country of Mozambique is located on the east coast of southern Africa. We all started out from Pretoria and drove through to Komatipoort, where we crossed the border into Mozambique. From there we went to Maputo, and then up north all the way up to Inhambane, and finally on to Ponta de Barra, where we ended up camped out on the beach. My friend Zak and I decided that we wanted to go and explore Africa, and on a student budget all we could afford was Series 3 Land Rovers. Zak had an 88-inch shorty and I had the 109-inch station wagon. We spent many months fixing them and repairing them, and they were our inspiration for this trip. We all met up at Christo's house in Pretoria, and then in Land Rover terms we set off for the long journey to Komatipoort. There was a heat wave the day we set off, and it was so hot inside of the Land Rovers, which didn't have any insulation between the engine and the cab, that our shoes started to melt onto the floor. We arrived in Komatipoort late in the evening and set about setting up camp, and ended the day in true South African fashion with a braai, even though it was 1 o'clock in the morning. After a few hours rest, we packed up camp and joined the line to the Komatipoort border crossing. It took the better part of a day to get through the border, and we were then on our way to Maputo. While the Bay of Maputo is picturesque, the city was not, and the traffic followed no logic, so we hightailed it out of there towards the north. We took a few detours while looking for the Macaneta ferry, but were eventually able to spot it in the distance and drove down to join the line to get onto the ferry. None of us had ever seen a rural ferry before, and if anybody doesn't know what they're like, they're rickety, overcrowded, and look like they're about to tip over at any moment. It was with dread that we watched the load arrive. Zak, Christo and my vehicles went across on the first load, and we then waited for Donovan, who came across on the second load. We arrived at Tsakane and set up our camp on the sand, which is something we've become very accustomed to doing. We ended that evening in true South African style with a big braai or barbecue. After a slow morning, we made a good breakfast, and then started with the job of repairing Land Rovers. As I had just put a new engine in, my head had to be retorqued on the beach, and Zak had a small oil leak which he wanted to check out. With the Land Rovers running smoothly, we set off to go and explore the area surrounding us. The sand in Mozambique is really thick, and as you can see, the vehicle struggled to get through. We stopped at the local store to stock up on some beer before heading home. Land Rovers and their owners are both thirsty creatures, and the next morning, after making sure all the tanks were full, we set off to the beach. Unfortunately, it seems the sun seemed to get to some of us. Zak tried to take his Land Rover for a spin next to the beach, but ended up stuck, so we spent the rest of the afternoon digging him out. This picture is the heart of the road less explored. A bunch of friends exploring, having fun, and living a good life. The next day we had to hit the road north through Xai-Xai to Kudu, where we had booked to stay at the Marisol camp. We all set about breaking camp and packing the vehicles. We had to brave the Macaneta ferry again, which arrived with the bus loaded onto it. And when we loaded the Land Rover, the vehicle behind me didn't have any brakes, so it used the Land Rover as its brake and bumped me forward into the gap. The roads to Xai-Xai were good, and the Land Rovers made their top speeds. Xai-Xai was the last major town we would have on our route, and so we stopped to draw money at the local bank and fill up with fuel. The roads heading out of Xai-Xai were not in good condition, and we had to rely on our map to get us where we needed to go. We eventually made it to Kudu, and then we were onto a dirt track to get us to Marisol. Marisol is separated from Kudu by a lake, and we crossed the bridge to get us to the campsite. We set up camp and started the braai, but it had been a long day, and as it was close to 3 AM in the morning, a number of us started falling asleep. The next morning we made our way down the dunes and had breakfast overlooking the ocean. The beaches at Marisol are absolutely beautiful, with miles and miles of nothing, except the odd fishermen, who we were able to convince to sell us our supper. The heat was near unbearable, and we had to get real creative in keeping cool. We ended up spending the afternoon in the lagoon, and then making our supper. After supper, it was time to hit the local bar for the rest of the evening. The next morning, we broke camp and then threaded our way through the coconut trees back to Kudu. Just as we were about to join the main road in Kudu, this pickup truck lost its brakes in front of me, and as it rolled back, the occupants hopped out and tried putting coconuts under the wheels to stop it, but with a loud bang it smashed into the Land Rover. Now, as per custom in Mozambique, the owner hopped out with a big wad of cash in his hand saying, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." I inspected the Land Rover and it didn't have any damage, so I refused the offer of the wad of cash and we moved on north. On the dirt roads we found groups of children begging for sweets and dancing, and we had to get real creative to get around them. The many coconut trees made it very obvious where the campsite got its name. After we had made camp, we went down to the beach for a quick swim and a late afternoon snooze. The next morning we made our way down to the beach and enjoyed the morning swimming, snorkeling, and enjoying the wide open spaces. Back in camp, Donovan started with lunch, while the rest of us just sat around, and Zak came to terms with spending too much time snorkeling. As we were running low on supplies, we decided to head to Inhambane to see if we could find some way to buy some food. We found the central market, but after taking a look inside and seeing the fish that had been lying out in the heat all day, we decided that we would do with vegetables and bread. Well, vegetables didn't sound that appetizing, so we decided to try the local restaurant. And we waited an hour to get a waiter, and then another hour to be informed that they didn't have any fries. So we decided to go back to camp and rustle up whatever vegetables we could get together. The next morning we had breakfast and then wound our way through the coconut trees to Paindane. Here we found a small path that took us down to the beach, and we spent the rest of the morning lazing in the shade. Back in Coconut Bay, Zak's Land Rover had found a friend. This is a forward control, and for those of you who don't know, the forward control is a fairly scarce Land Rover. This one had a history all the way back from England and how it got to South Africa, and it's great to see a model in this good condition still being used to launch boats. We decided to be very patient and brave the restaurant again. During the long wait for food, we found that drinking lighthouse rum from a coconut, or straight from the bottle, helped to make the wait less boring. After a long wait, our food finally arrived, and we were overjoyed to have some nice crispy lobster. The next morning we packed our things and left for the short drive to Ponta de Barra. On the way to Ponta de Barra we found the small sand dune, and as we were not very experienced sand drivers, we all got stuck, so we let down our tires and tried again, but Christo couldn't get up with his trailer. Fortunately, a friendly Land Rover driver helped us pull the trailer across the sand dune, and we were on our way again. Ponta de Barra is breathtakingly beautiful, and we found out that our campsite would be on the beach. Came across some guys selling giant crayfish or lobster, which we bought to eat as a special meal for Christmas. Donovan, on the other hand, found a crab, which kept us entertained for the whole afternoon. That evening, our hosts at the campsite were frying a fish and invited us to join them for the meal, which we did, and afterwards stayed for a few drinks. Christmas Day, and we spent most of the morning lazing around camp and cooling off in the sea. We were able to buy some prawns or shrimp to add to our Christmas feast. For the rest of the afternoon, we joked around the pot, adding ingredients and spending time chatting and having fun as the meal slowly simmered away. Now, if you ever do make a prawn pot, Just remember to take the shells and legs off the prawns, otherwise they mix with your rice and give you a nasty surprise in every second and third bite. But it did taste delicious. We ended Christmas Day with a good meal, good laughs and good friends. The next morning we took a long walk down the beach to watch the fishermen. And then we all took a good long afternoon nap. That night we fried our last meat, steak, which had been maturing for the whole trip. As we'd run out of meat, we headed out early the next morning to go and try and catch some fish. After many hours of trawling, Kudu was the only one who managed to hook and land a fish. On our way back we were joined by some dolphins before we landed on the beach. That evening, before we could prepare the fish, we made a startling discovery. Despite popular belief, Toyotas sometimes need attention too, and Donovan's Hilux was not running correctly. Fortunately, we were there to capture the moment. We then set about preparing our fish for supper. We had so enjoyed our stay at beautiful Barra beach that we decided to make the drive back to South Africa in a single day and spend more time at the beach. With the vehicles packed, we gave them a quick once-over and then headed off. We made a quick stop at Bar Babalas, or the hangover bar, to pump up our tires. And with tires inflated, Zak immediately got stuck, of course. Some of the roads in Mozambique are in great condition and you can make good progress. Some of them are okay, and some of them are absolutely terrible with huge potholes that you have to drive around slowly. And sometimes you just have to get off the road altogether. You also have to know your road signs. Trees in the road like this means there's an accident. Traveling these roads was really interesting. There were pedestrians everywhere. Hawkers selling their wares. General bad driving. Overloaded taxis. And overloaded buses. Charcoal was loaded onto trucks and then distributed to vendors on the side of the road. Cashew nuts were advertised for sale by hanging them in a tree. We made a late afternoon stop to have something to eat and then hit Maputo as it was getting dark. We were fortunate to find that the border post wasn't busy and we were back in South Africa late that evening. The next morning we treated ourselves to a wimpy breakfast, and it was great not to have to make your own food for a change. We then hit the road, stopping at a few places along the way before arriving at Kudu Ranch. My brave wife made this whole trip in our noisy, hot Land Rover, and yet she still had a smile on her face. We also immediately sold the Land Rover after getting back. We met up with more of our friends who had joined us, and then after a good shower, we settled down to a good braai. Stay tuned, or better yet, subscribe to see more videos from the road less explored.